Kia ora. Welcome everybody to our series of ongoing webinars. This week we'll be looking at AI use in the museum sector, particularly showing some examples in MOTAT, the Museum of Transport and Technology in Auckland, and some of our other Vernon Browser sites. I'm joined today by Amy de Hamel from Pixel Fusion, and she'll be talking about some of the work that they've been doing with MOTAT. I'll start off by just giving a general introduction on some of the areas where AI is already being used in the museum sector. Image analysis is particularly powerful with AI. AI is very good at detecting patterns. So for example, here's one of our Vernon Browser sites where the Art Gallery of Western Australia is using AI built into Vernon Browser to detect things like patterns and shapes. Here are a sample of images which it is tagged with the keyword circle because it detected that particular shape by looking at the images. It's also good at detecting subject categories in some cases. That's more complex to determine, but often those keywords add more value to the collection data on top of the existing text that the cataloguers have recorded. As part of that image analysis, it's also possible to do color analysis. So you might be able to browse your collection looking at particular colors that group things together. Here's one of our US sites, the Farnsworth Art Museum, and looking at a selection of their artworks with a particular shade of blue. It can also be used to repair images. Although within the museum industry, that's something where you need to be very careful to clearly note any images which have been augmented with AI. So it might be used in a very specific context. So for example, an exhibition where you might show an original image and then show a repaired image to allow the visitor to get a clearer view of that particular picture. AI can also be used to predict things that are going to happen in the future. Another Auckland software company is The Exhibit, and they use their software to gather information on visitors and combine that with other resources like weather forecasts and then help predict what will happen based on that. An example would be whether or not typically rainy days or public holidays affect your visitor numbers, and that may allow you to plan in advance whether you have extra or less staff on a particular day. AI can also be used in content creation. So ChatGPT is one example of a tool which has very powerful capabilities for generating content based on its existing set of knowledge. Here's an example where I've asked ChatGPT to provide me with examples of games that teenagers might play in a museum. And it's generated a whole set of ideas which I could then use as a starting point to then build some games for teenagers in my own museum. AI is also used in conversational contexts. So various different chatbots can provide answers to common questions. People often have chatbots on websites that might answer simple questions like, what are your opening hours? But it can also be used for more complex activities. This particular example has been built by an independent developer accessing shared resources that are available from the British Museum. And here we can see an example chat dialogue where somebody's asking questions about one of the Lewis chessmen. Conversational AI will be an area that Amy will be touching on, but I'll first look at the image detection side of things, which is something we make use of within our Vernon Browser product. This is the online collection for MOTAT, where they have 86,000 items currently online. So I'll show an example within MOTAT and some other examples from other clients about how we're using AI in the image analysis. You might be, for example, wanting to create a short-term highlight set tied to Christmas. And as part of that, you might be wanting to try and find images which have shades of green and red that are associated with Christmas. The color detection can help you do that. So if I look on the home page of the MOTAT website, there's a color palette of the most common colors, and I could drill into any of those to see what images the AI has found that matches that particular color. So I'll click on one of those shades of green, and then based on that, within Vernon Browser, I can create highlight sets, and I might include these red and green signal flags as part of that temporary set that I have on the website during the Christmas period. We've had sites use the color analysis for a variety of different reasons. That's included identifying works that are made of pounamu or New Zealand greenstone that weren't catalogued as such back in Vernon CMS, and identifying works that are of a particular brand where there's a colour that's already identified as being in that brand. If I switch to the British Red Cross, one of our UK sites, they have a brand red colour that's part of their logo, and I could use the colour analysis to try and find objects in the collection that are connected with that brand. So they may have nothing in the catalogue record that specifically says that this is a Red Cross poster, but by navigating by colour, I've got another way of accessing that content. Again, I'll scroll down the page, and on their site, we've sorted the colour swatches so that their particular shade of red is the very first colour swatch that's listed on the home page. And so if I click on that, I'll be able to find all of the records that have that particular shade of green, and we'll see that many of those are in fact Red Cross posters. The image analysis can also be used to detect patterns and keywords. I'll look at some of the art-based websites we've got because they have some quite relevant examples. Maitland City Council have their entire art gallery collection in Vernon Browser, and this is an example of a symmetrical artwork. In the original description that's recorded back in Vernon CMS, there's nothing to note that there's symmetry in that particular artwork, but using AI, we have added additional subject keywords on the right, and we can see that symmetry is one of the things that has been tagged in there. So I could now click on that keyword if I want to see all of the things in their collection that exhibit some form of symmetry. And so we'll see a whole bunch of different works, and I could narrow that down perhaps so that I'm only interested in things from the art gallery. And that might help me gather things that are for a particular themed exhibition, for example. We can also use AI to add subject keywords that describe what's actually depicted in that artwork. So here I've got an example of a landscape. Landscape's actually in the title, so I could have easily searched for that already, but that may not always be the case. If I scroll down to the right, we can see indeed that the AI has also detected that it thinks this is a landscape, as well as tagging other things like it including a field and a hill. So I could click on natural landscape, and I'd be able to find a whole lot of different artworks, many of which don't actually have any keyword in them to say that they're a landscape. And we can already see that at the beginning of the results, that Naples is the landscape depicted here, but I wouldn't have been able to find this artwork without AI adding that subject tag for me. However, within AI, there are biases, and that's something we have to be aware of whenever we're using these tools. Those biases can come primarily from the content, which is teaching the AI how to match up things, how to find patterns, and so on. That the content we're feeding it may already be a biased subset. And then the biases can also come in the design and development. Depending who's building those tools, they already may have particular biases as to how they interpret the world and interpret the content. And so in Vernon Browser, we've had to build administration tools to cope with those biases. And I'll show an example of both modifying keywords and modifying colors. Within our demo website, this is an example of one of the records that's been kindly given to us from Queensland Museum. And we can see that the AI has added subject keywords for that record. So it's tagged it as being an organism. It thinks there's a fish in there, which is correct, but it also thinks there's a ruler present in that image, which there is, but maybe that isn't really useful within the context of the site. Most of these natural history records have a ruler for scale in the image, but it isn't necessarily useful for the public user. So we might decide that that's a keyword that isn't relevant for this particular record, or possibly not relevant for our whole website. An administrator can log into Vernon Browser and control those things. So this is the dashboard for the admin area of Vernon Browser for that same demo website. One of the things I can do is browse all of the image auto tags. So all of the tags that have automatically been added by AI. And we'll see that one of the most common tags on the entire site is ruler, and that's because every one of those natural science images includes the ruler at the bottom of it. If I clicked on that, it'll just show me what results there are that have that ruler in it. If I want to actually fine-tune that by blocking it on a particular record or across the whole site, I can do that directly within the admin section. We can also see how confident Google is that that subject keyword is actually correct. So that percentage is a confidence level that Google has returned back to us. There's an edit link next to those auto tags, and I can click on that if I'm wanting to alter the tags. We can see that previously there was already a tag for office ruler, and I've deleted that. But we might want to go a step further and say that ruler is also not very useful. So I can either delete that term just on this one record, or I can block it from the entire site by clicking on delete all records. In my case, I'm going to cancel that because this is an example we show people of how we can delete a tag. So it's useful for me to keep that to show as an example again in the future. Similarly, we can modify the keywords that have been added. Lastly, we have the color analysis. The color analysis is looking at the broadest parts of that particular image that are of the same color. However, that may not match human perception. In this particular artwork, we can see that there's some very large blocks of color, but there is a bright pink. That particular pink is actually a very small area of the total image, but it's something very recognizable to the human eye. If I scroll down to the right, we can see that the colors that have been detected don't include that particular pink. And in fact, the last of those colors, the Peru brown, it's detecting interspersed in the grain of this pink area on the left and right. So we might, if we wish, modify those swatches. And that's again an option to edit those. If I go into Vernon Browser, I just have to search and find that same record, which we can do from the Browse Data section. And then like we did with the image keywords, I can edit the colors that it's detected. Of course, this is something you'd only do in an exceptional case because you wouldn't normally have the resources to be checking even a small fraction of these records, but you may have an iconic picture where you really want that to be found by a particular color element that's not dominant, but is very recognizable. So these are the 4 colors I have. Next to each of those, I've got the option of deleting it if I decide that that color swatch isn't that useful. And I might decide that the Peru color falls into that case. So I've deleted that. And we can also add additional colors. So I could manually add a shade of pink so that then that record is able to be found using that swatch in the future. We give a rough estimate as to how much of the painting has that particular color. So let's say 5% or 6% has that color. And then that swatch is available for people to search on from now on. So that gives you a broad overview of the two areas where we're using AI in Vernon Browser to help people discover and explore things in your collection. I'll stop sharing my screen at this point, and I'll switch over to Amy to show the work they've been doing with MOTAT.
Hi everyone, Amy from Pixel Fusion. I might have seen some of you at NDF. This is where we last kind of showcased some of the work that we've been doing here. So a little bit of a background here is basically we are a technology partner that helps support MOTAT with their digital aspirations. Basically, we've been working with them for a long time and looking after their websites and stores and so forth. And being the Museum of Technology and Transport was really exciting last year when all the AI work really started to bubble up to the surface. And there were a lot of options that we could look to explore that up until recently have really been in the domain of, let's say, the glam sectors that have a bit bigger budgets than many of us get to work with, right? So we're dealing with really complex toolkits. Now there's a lot out there that we can adapt and use to do some really cool stuff at kind of a more affordable budget end. The way we kick off any kind of AI project, and it's really interesting to tie this in with where we're at, Paul, with some of the examples that you gave as well. A lot of the time when we have initial conversations around AI, especially in the glam sector, the focus is primarily on areas like conversation or chat. And it's a natural guiding that people have, or they focus very much on search as well. And we've seen some really exciting stuff happen around search and keywords and identification, as AI is particularly good at pattern recognition, as Paul commented there. However, whenever you're looking at doing any kind of AI project, it's really important at the start to step back and think big. Take away what you think you know that AI can do, and just to have a fantastic session, really bouncing around what are the different ideas that you'd like to pursue. And then what you can do is investigate how AI can support that. Because more often than not, there's always a way for you to do something really interesting. One of the key things that we found with the workshops that we did with MOTAT before we got into building anything was making sure that we brought all the great people into the same room. So we had people from digital, we had people from collections, we had people from library, really just trying to pull all of those heads together and talk through different focuses or different challenges or different opportunities without giving anything away for some of the fantastic detailed ideas behind MOTAT. I've got a couple of broad bubbles here of things that we kind of maybe touched on, or we've touched on with other clients as well, all the way from conversations with collection objects to having AI guided tours across an entire museum, curating your own exhibition pieces that are personalized to you, doing weird stuff, right? This is a really cool one with things like with the zoo. You could take different animals and create an animal hybrid. With transport and technology, you could take a fire truck and an ambulance. What are we going to get, right? There are some interesting things that you can play visually with AI that were never available before, all the way through to things like time travel. And then some of the kind of key administration pieces as well, enhancing your data. If you've got a large amount of collection items, how can you leverage AI to actually make your lives way easier in the back end as well? So it's not all about front facing. Thinking across the whole spectrum is really important up front. We've seen three really common themes come through, and we worked through this process with MOTAT as well. One of the key ones that we've talked about a lot is AI-powered search. It's incredibly powerful compared to the old search paradigms that we used to have available to us, because we're no longer having to focus too much on tags and keywords. We can use AI to surface tags and keywords, as we saw with the demo with Vernon as well. But if you take that out of the equation, you've also got some interesting things that you can do around search for more contextual items. So if you search for something, it's going to think of the whole context, not just look for an individual word, which is really exciting if you're dealing with a large amount of data, right? However, for the proof of concept, we wanted to do something super exciting for MOTAT. And while search would have been really useful, wasn't going to quite hit that digital user engagement piece that we're looking to encapsulate within the project. So we moved on to conversations, which, as we know, is one of the more common themes that people are seeing at the moment. Chats with individual collection items. So some examples, if you haven't seen these before as well, the AI-powered search, Acme has a really good example on their site of one of those in beta. And then the object conversations was, sorry, I always get this acronym wrong, but National Museum of Sound and Audio, I think it is, in Australia, has some really good examples there of object-driven conversations as well. So to be able to talk to a movie or something that's within their catalogue. The problem that you have with object conversations is for AI to work really well from a conversational standpoint is it needs to have a deep pool of data to pull on. So it really depends on how much data you have about that one particular object in your catalogue. So if it's only going to be maybe one page of data, think, is that enough to actually have a conversation with that item? So where we got to with our proof of concept in this case was actually grouping items together into what we called a topic. So that could be absolutely anything. In the example I'm going to show you, we're looking at topics around particular items like cameras or communications. But there's nothing stopping you from having a topic that focuses on light and something a little bit more esoteric or a little bit more kind of user-focused as well. You can really explore different dynamics there, which give you a much richer contextual conversation with several items across the catalogue and encourages user to dive a little bit deeper. The other added benefit we had there was it really helped to bring collections and digital much closer together. We wanted something that would actually showcase on the website. So it's going to be a kind of a content block that could be lifted and moved onto a homepage, a campaign page, an event page. So it's something that digital could leverage to tie people into very specific collection items versus the collections experience as well. So there are two very different use cases there. All right, let me switch across and I'll show you the AI demo that we have in action. So this is completely in beta. You are getting a sneak peek, but basically this is kind of seeing behind the wall here. And that's something to call out as well, is that when it comes to AI, this is a new space. We're playing around with it. We're learning as we go. So it's a balance of being open and adaptable as to how you want to use this, but also making sure that you've got that protection in place for your brand and your collection items. So it's finding that sometimes tricky balance between the two. Okay, so this is essentially where we got to with our proof of concept. So in this case, we're looking at what we call topics. We've got cameras and communications. Because we're dealing with a chatbot and it can access any information we like, we also opened it up to MOTAT. So if someone wanted to use it to ask the AI chatbot, hey, when are you open? What's the best thing for me to do on a rainy Sunday at MOTAT with a 4-year-old? It's going to help and answer that as well. So just stretching what we wanted to do with the proof of concept. But the primary focus here is tying into Vernon collections for the camera catalog and the communications. This is dynamically going to pick those items up from the catalog. There's no curation that has to be done by the digital team or the collections team. It knows what items are cameras based off the AI information that it's pulled through from the API. Again, we're also just dealing with public information here. So only the catalog items that will show on Vernon Browser, none of the private stuff that's behind the wall, right? So we're making sure that we're only working with the items that you're wanting to work with. One of the other key things that we worked out as we went through it was there are so many different types of people that interact with collections at MOTAT. You've got kids on school trips, you've got historians that might be wanting to look into something very, very particular. So we wanted to allow people to communicate with this in the way that they're going to appreciate it most. So we go simplified, 5-year-olds speak, all the way up to in-depth. And the AI is naturally going to change its language based on how you interact with it. So let's jump in. So if I go simplified and ask, how does a camera work? It also allows us to have kind of more interesting conversations that aren't purely focused on collections as well. Some of the others I'll show you focus on collection items, but you can have more generic questions in here too. And people can also just start chatting however they like. They don't have to have one of the prompts to get started. So we can see this is very much focused on talking to a child, explaining how cameras work. Whereas if I refresh it and we come to in-depth, go to the exact same question, you're going to have a very different result generated through from this. Sometimes it takes a moment to think. There we go. Much larger result. So this is the way that you can take some data that you've got and be able to talk to multiple different audiences or different use cases as you want. So you can create as many avatars as you like and spread it across. Behind the scenes, we've actually got 5 different levels that are clearly outlined as to what the differences are between those. And you can adapt and change that kind of information as you want. You can give it a certain brand, you can give it a certain tone of voice. You can even, if you want to, train it to act as a particular individual from history, if there's enough data for you to base that off and you want to go down that road. Refresh this again, and I'll show you one that ties into the collections of items. So rare or unique cameras, let's ask about that. So the way that we set this up to work is it actually ties into the collection items themselves. So here we go. It's going to bring up a few different items directly related to cameras in the collection that are deemed a little bit special. And we can pick a particular one as well, and we could ask a little bit more depth if we want to, and we can choose to enhance that with ChatGPT. So let me find one here, Perma Special Camera. If I'm investigating and trying to understand some context around how this one might have been used during a specific wartime period, I can come in and ask that. And it's going to actually, in this case, use ChatGPT to enhance that information. That's also a decision that you need to make as to whether you want to restrict the conversations and the information to be limited to the data set that you've got to work with, or whether you want to leverage kind of common data sets like ChatGPT to allow enhancement of that information. For this example, we went with enhancement because there are questions there that we wanted people to be able to ask that weren't in the data set. For example, how does a camera work? That information is not in the Vernon collections and it's not in the MOTAT website. So how can we communicate those types of answers to people through this? So lots of different ways that we can basically look to use this. So looking at the whole program or the whole piece of work, the way that we started off with was obviously workshopping to come up with some proof of concept ideas, refining those with the team, and then building a proof of concept. With the proof of concept, the next phase that you've got is to look at initial testing and feedback. So that's generally how you'd go with most kind of upgrades and projects. You have that feedback process with key people in the team, refine it. In this case, we also took it out to showcase at NDF to get direct feedback from other people in the industry, which is a really interesting exercise for us and for MOTAT. The next phase that you're going to have is stakeholder buy-in. And that's that sensitive piece that I was talking about before, where because we're dealing with something that is so new, it's making sure that all of the different departments and areas of the organization have an opportunity to buy in, have an opportunity to give feedback. While they may not be the ones making the final decision for things going out, it is going to cross a lot of different areas within the organization, especially if you're pulling more information together. So in our case, we're dealing with website content, article content, exhibition content, and also collections, right? So we want to make sure that everyone is correctly being heard. The other thing is feeding it back as well. Whatever you're going to put out into market, make sure you're being really clear about it. As you might have seen on our beta, we have a beta label on there. It is clearly communicated to users how it's being used. There's a terms and conditions link in there. As long as users understand that the information that you're providing may not be absolutely 100% accurate, because we are dealing with AI, if we can communicate that right up front, then it does make the experience a lot better for people. The key thing next is iterating and adapting. As soon as you actually get sign-off within your organization and you get it out there, be ready for it to need to change based on user feedback as well. Once it gets out there, people are going to use it in ways you never thought they would. So it might be that you're needing to ring fence specific things. You're focusing on closing off certain information avenues that people have followed down that you never expected they would. So what I'm talking about there as an example is not security breaches for your information. It might be that people are asking inappropriate information. or biased information and you're wanting to shut the gate on that. Likewise, there might be people wanting to do things with it that it's not built to be capable of just yet. So capturing that information, capturing what people are asking or how they're using it is really important, because that's going to give you insight into the really exciting things that you can do next off the back of this. So treat it as that first iteration and where you can go from here and what opportunities you have. And just, recognizing, as always with new development, it's never going to be perfect on the first go.